Tennessee posted the highest overall attendance of any school in the nation in 2023-24 across football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. A total of 1,161,218 people attended their 38 home events in 3 sports. They had 96,000 fans more than the second place team, which was LSU, who had 44 home events, and South Carolina with 41 home events was number 3. Those 3 schools all topped 1 million. Nobody else did. Jimmy has covered Tennessee at their height, and he has covered them when the athletic department fell off the face of the earth. Jimmy, talk a little bit about what do you think of the morale of the Tennessee Vols athletics program right now? And is this part of just the excitement behind particularly men's basketball and football?
It's never been better. There have been some years where Tennessee's athletic department had it going. In the 1990s, they had some outstanding, more so football and women's basketball teams than they did men's basketball. But yeah, it's never been better. You look at the All Sports Trophy, they've won it in the SEC 2 years in a row. The last time I looked, they were 5th in the National All Sports Trophy. They had a really good winter performances by their teams. I think, and here's the thing that I look at, and it started a little bit after Rick Barnes got here. I don't know if this was his influence, but maybe it was. You see football players at baseball games. You see baseball players at softball games. You see softball players at football games. You see all this interaction with the student athletes. I do think they've created a culture of a family atmosphere. It's not, people talk about it all the time, but it's not always easy to do. And I think they have that. I think you see everybody pulling for each other. And I think these athletes like each other. I think they feed on their success. I mean, even the men's tennis team, they lost to Kentucky 4-3 in their match. They finished 2nd in the SEC in men's tennis. You've got the swimming program that's done very well under Matt Credits for years. The softball team's done terrific. Women's tennis, I think they won 6 or 7 matches in a row in the SEC. I've never seen the athletic department better all around than it is right now. And I do think a part of that is the support that athletes give other athletes in different sports.
Yeah. Do you think it helps? And because I'm going to add a caveat to this. Tennessee is the only school that has a top 10 stadium size in football and basketball both. Mm-hmm. And so is this more reflective of the passion of the fan base, or do you think it's more reflective of just how big their stadiums are?
Well, the size of the stadium helps. There's no doubt about that. It does help. Now, even with the size of the stadium in women's basketball, you may know this. I don't know. Did they average 10,000 a game?
I'm actually not sure. I need to pull that up.
Maybe right at it.
About
women's basketball didn't average as much. It was less than 10,000 a game.
Yeah, right? They had 8,880. Yeah, 8,880.
So LSU draws more, South Carolina draws more, UConn draws more. So the other programs, and that's reflective of the Lady Vols not being as successful as they have been. When they were at their zenith, there was a year when they averaged over 15,000 on the Pat Summit when they had it going. And actually outdrew the men one of those years. So the size of the stadium helps, but winning helps. The success helps. I think that's a big part of it. And the fans like to be a part of a winner, no doubt. And so I think that's the winning is certainly important. Having a big stadium for football, having a big arena for basketball, that does contribute to it. But I would be curious to know. So Alabama, there are about 5 other football teams in the league that are as big as Neyland Stadium, right? There are about 5 of them. But I don't think any basketball arena is as big as Thompson-Boling Arena at Food City Center. So did I get that right? Thompson-Boling Arena at Food City Center? So I think the basketball arena certainly helps in that regard, having the size that they do. And it also helps that in men's basketball, and you have the numbers, I don't. I bet you they average, I know in SEC games they average over 20,000, which is pretty darn good.
Yeah, I think Tennessee is one of the few schools that does have a level of passion in both sports. Do you think Now, obviously, they weren't drawing like this in the 2010s, but I would say Tennessee probably has a more loyal fan base than most for when they're struggling. And so, Jimmy, I've said for a while that the two biggest scams in America and American capitalism are this. The first is owners convincing middle-class taxpayers, billionaire owners convincing middle-class taxpayers that they need to fund a new stadium to watch billionaires perform. That's one. The second one is billionaire owners convincing middle-class taxpayers that you should support our teams even when we're losing, because no other business would get away with saying you should buy my product even when it sucks. Okay, so a do you think to a degree at different times that has actually hurt Tennessee, where because the fan base was so passionate, the athletic department got complacent because the money was coming in no matter what?
I don't think so. I can't give you an example of that. I will say this. I think there was an athletic director a few years ago that he cared about football and men's basketball and nothing else. But Danny White, I think Mike Hamilton wanted a well-rounded program. I know Doug Dickey wanted a well-rounded program. Danny White obviously wants a well-rounded program. So you might be able to give one example where, hey, let's do well in football and men's basketball, and if they do okay in the other sports, that's fine. I don't really care. And that was over about a 5 or 6 year stretch. So I think there's only one example of what you're talking about. The rest of the time, I think they have wanted to succeed. And I'll debate with people about Doug Dickey, because a lot of them thought, well, he doesn't really want to hire a good basketball coach. He wants football to be the king. Well, I researched the coaches that he pursued. I mean, he tried to hire Roy Williams from Kansas, and Roy wouldn't come. But he did try to hire people. I remember he went after Kevin Stallings at Vanderbilt when Stallings was doing very well. And I actually talked to Stallings at the SEC spring meetings, and I asked him, why didn't he take the Tennessee job? Now, he did say this. He told me, he said, look, I just didn't feel comfortable working for Doug Dickey. I thought he was a football guy. But Doug Dickey did try to hire more prominent coaches. He just was not able to land some of them. And so he ended up, quote, settling for some lesser named coaches. But to your point, I don't think that I only think there's one AD over there that cared only about a couple of sports and wasn't that interested in the success of others.
Yeah, I feel like I know the AD you're talking about, but I also know that in the early, there was a period, wasn't there, where, I mean, let's call it what it is. Entering the last decade, they call it the decade of dysfunction. But I think what's underrated is Tennessee, because they had two athletic departments, they were in dire financial straits relative to other SEC schools for a little while, weren't they? And they had to basically literally take a hatchet and just knock off some jobs, didn't they, to get their finances in order?
Yeah, they had. But what happened was they had so darn many buyouts that their reserve. I remember, and this is hard. This is unbelievable. I do remember Dave Hart telling me that when he became the athletic director, Tennessee's reserve was $1.9 million, and Alabama's was $80 to $100 million. That was their reserve. What happened in part for Tennessee was they were paying a bunch of coaches not to coach. There was one point where there was almost like $30 million on the books for paying off coaches that they had fired. And that's pretty irresponsible to have that situation occur. And then they weren't doing as well in fundraising because some of the programs you're firing coaches because they're not doing that well, paying them out. The program's not doing that well. That's why you fired them. So your attendance is down. So it was a confluence of several events that led them to where financially they were struggling. And there was a time, I don't know if you remember this, and I may be a little off on my amount of money here, but there was a time when the athletic department had to borrow money from the university to break even. And I think that number was like $3 or $4 million. Now think about that. And then the university charged them interest on the money that they borrowed. So it took them a while to get out of that funk. And obviously success had to do with it. But yeah, they were in dire straits financially there for a few years.
Yeah, I do remember that. And it was the worst timing because I remember when Dave Hart talked about the reserves, that was right because they had 1.9 million and then they had to fire Derek Dooley and hire a new coach at that moment. And
Mhm.
and the SEC network revenue hadn't started yet because the network wasn't going to launch until 2014. And it was really funny. I think that was a big one of the things you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I felt one of the things that unfortunately undid Dooley was not just losing to Kentucky, but Dave Hart went public and said, I'm not renewing the contracts of any of these assistant coaches right now. And I mean, at that point, he was a dead man walking, wasn't he? When he has coach assistants who are on a 1-year contract.
Yes. But I would agree with that. But I'd also say his one-loss record may help make him a dead man walking. The loss to Kentucky was certainly, he had no clue that loss to Kentucky was as impactful on the Tennessee fan base. And he told some people that at the time, and then they explained to him the situation, and then he finally got it. And that's when he went into hibernation for about, what was it, like 37 days, whatever it
Yep.
was, where you couldn't find him, nobody talked to him, and he didn't appear again until, I guess, after the end of that recruiting cycle that year. But yeah, he made an awful lot of mistakes at Tennessee. But yeah, and the reason for the not renewing those contracts, it was in part because of their performance on the field, but a lot of it was a financial situation that the sports department was in.
Yeah, that's what I had always thought about it too. So obviously things are a lot different now. And it's funny because it doesn't seem like Danny White has to, because he's so in love with hiring up and comers, he doesn't really have to. It doesn't seem like Tennessee's ever going to be on the hook, do you think, anymore for these insane buyouts? Because most of the coaches he's going to hire that he's high on, he's not going to have to spend a lot of money on, right? Because they're up and comers. They're not home run hires.
Right. And if they become a home run hire, that's when he pays them. So, for example, as you know, with Kim Caldwell, she wins a national championship. She gets paid equal to or more than the highest paid coach in women's basketball, which right now is a little over $3 million. So if you succeed at a high level, he'll pay you. But until then, you're going to be middle of the road in the SEC in terms of your salary. I don't know where, you might remember this, I don't know where Heupel was when he hired him as far as the SEC. I would bet you it was no better than 6th or 7th, right? And so then after he went 11 and
lower than that.
I'm sorry, lower than that? Okay.
I think it was lower than that.
And so he goes 11-2, and what does he do? Now he's making $9 million a year. So when you prove yourself to be able to win at a high level or an elite level, that's when you get paid. But I think you make a good point. Until then, his history has been not to bring in a Jimbo Fisher and pay him $75 million over 10 years, right? He is not going to do that. And look how it bit A&M for doing that. So I don't disagree with that philosophy. Look, if you can get a home run hire, and by the way, I don't think there's that many home run hires, but if you can get one, you pay them a lot of money. Otherwise, I don't have any problem with hiring an up-and-coming coach. Now, and we'll see a few years down the road how Kim Caldwell works out. I do think she's going to have as much success as Kelly Harper on the minimum. That's the floor. The ceiling for her, I expect her to get back to the Elite Eight within a few years, if not the Final Four. I think she can get enough good players to do that.
Yeah, I think so too. It's and when that happens, I was thinking about this with the new coach, with Kim Caldwell there. You know, Tennessee's number one now. They could really separate themselves, right, in the next couple of years in terms of attendance with the excitement in football and men's basketball.
Yeah, so I mean, people are going to go watch football, right? You're going to have 100,000 on average. Men's basketball, if they continue to perform at a high level, they'll average at least 20,000, at least for SEC games. And then with the Lady Vols, I think the first year, now it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know what that roster is going to look like. It certainly is not a finished product right now. But if the Lady Vols come out and they're bad, then the attendance is going to go down some. But if they show some promise, if they can pull out a win, do you remember when Bruce Pearl got here and they went to Texas and they beat Texas? And I think they beat them like, I don't know, 92-75, whatever it was. Man, you talk about a buy-in. If the Lady Vols under Caldwell can have a big win like that early and show some promise, I think you'll see the attendance for women's basketball escalate quite a bit from the 8,800 that they averaged this past year.
Oh, I totally agree. I think everybody loves. I mean, people are always big on that. Everybody loves that one signature win early
Mhm.
for the coach. It's bringing it back to funny enough. Dooley, I think Dooley thought he had that against LSU in 2010, and that didn't bear out too well for him. But because even Butch Jones got it, because I believe Butch Jones got his signature win against South Carolina, wasn't it, in 2013? And that cost South Carolina the SEC East, funny enough. So, yeah, I totally agree with you that I think that's going to happen. And I think at the very least, I think I don't know how ticket sales work, but I want to know what you think about this. I think a coach that's on the hot seat that people are already done with, that season is less likely to sell tickets than a first year head coach, right? Because there's at least more excitement behind the first year head
Yes.
coach, isn't there?
Yeah. And to your point specifically, uh, how many season tickets would they sell if Kelly Harper came back? I would say fewer than what they're going to sell with Kim Caldwell. Now, I say that again, I do think the roster she puts together, if she can bring in some transfers, I don't know that she can get a Rakia Jackson, okay? But if she can bring in some good transfers and show some promise, here's the other thing, too. Uh, I think it would be beneficial to get out in the community and promote your product. Have a free clinic somewhere. Go out and do some work at some high schools. Get people interested. Make them feel they're a part of your program. That would help too. And I'm not so sure that the Lady Vols promoted the program as much as they could have over the last 7 or 8 years.
It's funny you say that because I feel like that was where Pat Summitt was a genius. I don't
Yeah.
think I there were multiple times when I was a student at Tennessee my first 2 years, and I mean Pat Summitt did every single event she could possibly do to get the Lady Vols into the community. And I'm guessing she was always that way, wasn't she?
Well, she was. And there were times when some of the players would go door to door. There were times when they would have really discounted tickets, even for some of the bigger games that they played, just to get people in the arena. And the feeling was, if you got a sample size of that, you'll come back because you're going to like what you see. And so, she was terrific at that. She was relatable to the public. She was a great speaker publicly, and she didn't turn down hardly any requests that she had. And so she did a great job of promoting and marketing the Lady Vols. And by the way, the Lady Vols, I think, still have a very strong brand. Is it the same brand that it was when Summitt was there? No, but it's still really good. And it's still such a brand that it should attract some of the elite players out of high school or from the transfer portal.